For more on inflation and the U.S. economy, we're joined by Eileen Appelbaum. She's the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
One of the things that perplexes me, it feels like we've kind of gotten used to this because the markets didn't really react a whole lot. We seemed relatively calm by it. Are you surprised?
Not really. What was surprising is the really ugly increase in inflation. It was certainly more than most people were expecting. But there is reason to think that things will begin to look a little better. Not a lot better, but a little, come the July report, because by the end of June and the beginning of July, we already saw oil prices coming down a little bit, and we saw appliance prices coming down a little bit. We noticed that retailers have inventories piling up on their shelves, and we expect that there will be discounts and sales and so on. So there's reason to think, I know we've said this before, but there's reason to think that the July numbers will be better than June.
Right.
But
I was going to say that the past couple of weeks, there's been a tremendous amount of blame, right? Republicans are blaming Democrats. Everyone's blaming everybody for all this, and I want to get your take on whether you think President Biden is to blame, or what can he do at this point?
Well, so politicians like to take claim when the economy is doing really well, but in fact, they have very little that they can do about inflation, this kind of inflation. It's driven by, as you mentioned, the high oil prices, the high grain prices, the supply chain problems, so that, for example, the U.S. is producing less cars today than it produced in 2019. Before the pandemic, and so that's because they can't get the parts, and so that's a big part of what's happening, and Biden cannot really do much about that. I would like to go on and say that the Fed can't do much about that either. Raising interest rates does not create another truck at the ports to carry goods. It doesn't do anything about oil prices or grain prices. So we have to be really careful in what the Fed does.
Well, I was going to say that we're talking already that the Federal Reserve might raise, it was originally 50, then 75, and I've heard people whisper a whole 1%. So if you're saying it doesn't work, I'm sure the Fed are talking to experts like you as well. Why does the Fed want to do that?
I don't think it's a problem with what they're talking about doing right now. We started from interest rates that were practically at zero, and I don't think anybody believes that interest rates can remain at zero forever. We also saw that the housing market was certainly beginning to overheat. Home prices were rising rapidly. Rents were rising. This is something that Fed policy does affect. It raises the interest rate, and it reduces, as a result, people can afford less in rent and less in home prices. So that has been good. And if the Fed wants to raise it, I hope not more than 75 basis points, but 75 basis points I think would be okay, as long as it does not signal that it's going to keep doing this. People compare the situation to Volcker, who in the 80s had high inflation, much higher than we have today, but went after it with no concern for what was going to happen to workers. When people say they want the Fed to act, they want the interest rate to go up, what they're actually saying is they want to see a lot more unemployment because they think it's a demand-driven problem. And if you have people out of work, they have very little in the way of demand to contribute.
Fair enough,
but
Eileen.
That's not the case now.
Fair enough, Eileen, and I want to challenge you on this as well, because you say that the politicians can't do much, and the White House administration won't have a solution to this or can't have a solution to this, and the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes will not have a sort of the desired impact. So what would you like to see happen? What would your solution be?
Right. So since I do think that the inflation will begin to slow. I do think Fed policy to this point has been good. I would be concerned if they continued, because throwing the economy into a recession will give us the worst of both worlds. I think what the politicians can do is that they can help people cope with the inflation by reducing other kinds of prices. So it would be wonderful if the Democrats could get their act together. The president has certainly proposed it, and that is that we reintroduce the child tax credit, which is actually a subsidy to parents of children. It's a check that comes every month, depending on the number of children you have and their ages. And that lifted more children out of poverty, that stabilized more families. And what it does is it allows these families to deal with the higher prices. So that would be one really good thing to do. Getting insulin prices under control. The president may be able to do this by means of an executive action. Why the drug companies think they should charge prices for insulin that are 10 times whether it's charged in the rest of the world, and that are extremely high when a large proportion of the American elderly are diabetic. So
Yeah.
there are things like that. Address drug prices, address the fact that we need to have a child tax credit,
You're opening all the Pandora's boxes here.
That's true.
We're going to need a lot more time, but I think the point is the numbers are really about the impact it's going to have on people. So Eileen, I thank you for helping us better understand this, and I hope the R word doesn't lead to the D word, which is either deflation or depression. So let's keep our fingers crossed that things will be okay. Eileen Appelbaum, thank you very much.
Thank you.